Right, Sally, it's 5 o'clock.
We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting, virtual meeting of the Plans Committee for Charnwood Borough Council. There are a number of things I would like to remind people before we start with the items on the agenda. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to please turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. And can I also remind everybody that this is a public meeting, so please conduct yourselves in an appropriate manner. Thank you. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I will do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand feature in the participant section of the Zoom software if they wish to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system. Voting will be undertaken by a roll call of all present in alphabetical order. Each member will state their name and how they wish to vote. For, against, abstain. Speakers will be called forward at the appropriate time by myself, the chair, or the vice chair, and their microphone will be unmuted by the co-host. Speakers have 5 minutes each, and they will be timed by the co-host. When you have 1 minute of time remaining, you will be advised. The co-host will mute you at the end of 5 minutes. If there are any technical problems with outside speakers presenting, then I will read out the speaker's statement, which has been sent in advance of the meeting. I'm now going to confirm those present, and I will call out everybody in alphabetical order. They're all councillors, so I won't repeat councillors. So it's Councillor Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear you.
Camsell.
Yes, I can hear and see you as well.
Capleton.
Yes, Chair, good evening. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Charles.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I confirm that I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Savage.
I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Tassel.
Chair, I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear proceedings.
And Ward.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you very much, councillors. I will also verify and confirm the officers in attendance. We have Richard Bennett, Head of Planning and Regeneration.
Yes, good evening. I can see and hear you, Chair.
Thank you. Jacqueline Jackson, Group Leader, Development Management.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Jeremy Eaton, Senior Planning Officer, with particular for items 1 and 2.
Thanks, Chair. I can confirm I can see and hear you. Thank
you. Mark Fennell, Team Leader, Natural and Built Environment, items 1 and 2.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Karen Brightman, Team Leader, Development Manager, Management for item 3.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear the
Thank
proceedings.
you. Sherry Grant, who is our locum solicitor.
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Karen Widdowson, Democratic Services Manager and co-host.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can both see and hear proceedings.
Ed Brown, Democratic Services Officer, taking the minutes for this meeting and sharing the power slides.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. And Sally Watson, undertaking the live stream.
Thanks, Chair. I can hear and see.
Thank you. And I think now the co-host or the clerk will confirm the speakers who are in the virtual public gallery waiting to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that all our speakers are in attendance. So we have Jenny Keane, agent for items 1 and 2, Elizabeth Jones from Salby Parish Council, also for items 1 and 2. We have Councillor Ranson who's speaking as well for items 1 and 2. And we also have Councillor Robert Shields, Burton on the Wolds, Coates and Prestwold Parish Council. And I do know that Jenny Boker will be joining us shortly. She's not in the attendee list, but I know I can just see her now actually. So she is here as well, so thank you.
Thank you, and it's just explained, Jenny Boker is the ward councillor.
Yes, that's right, apologies.
Thank you. Have we received any apologies? Thank you. Item 2 of the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting. The committee is asked to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of October 2020. I will now call each committee member in alphabetical order. I think that's the wrong date for the minutes. I think it should be the December or the end of November meeting. Would you like me to check that? Got my diaries.
Madam Chair, it is the date of the 3rd of December.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, so the minutes, just to clarify for those listening in, the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of October have been confirmed as a correct record. We're now looking at the meeting on the December the 3rd meeting of the Plans Committee, and I shall now call on each committee member in alphabetical order to respond. Councillors Bentley.
4, Chair.
Camsell.
4.
Capleton.
4, Chair.
Charles.
4, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Forrest.
4, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Grimley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 4.
Lowe.
Thank you. 4, Chair.
Thank you. Ranson.
4, Chair. Thank you.
Savage.
4, Chair.
Tassel.
4, Chair.
Good. Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. 4.
And Ward.
4, Chair.
Thank you very much, councillors. I confirm the minutes as a correct record, and I will sign them in due course and they will be returned to the office. Item 3, questions under committee procedure 12.8. No questions have been submitted up to date, to my knowledge. Could you confirm that no further questions have been? Ed Brown? Have we had any questions?
Sorry, none received, Chair.
Thank you. Disclosures, item 4, disclosures of pecuniary and personal interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? I'll move to Mr. Brown.
Chair, I can confirm that both councillors Fryer and Ranson have personal interests in item 1, application number P190218/2, the UCR Construction and Development Limited, 7 King Street, Salby, and item 2, application number P/19/1 10313/2, UCR Construction Development Limited, 7 King Street, Sowerby, as ward councillors, and as such will be speaking in their capacity as ward councillors for these items and will not be taking part in the meeting, discussion or voting thereon in. Councillor Bentley will take over as chair for those items. I would also like it recording for the purpose of the minutes that committee members have received correspondence in respect of items 1 and 2, 7 King Street, Sowerby, and that they will consider them in line with all the other relevant information and submissions relating to the applications.
Thank you. Are there any other disclosures of interest members wish to make? I don't see any hands going up, so I will take that there aren't any. Item 5, the planning applications. At today's meeting, we have 3 applications to consider. Their details are set out in the agenda and in the extras report. Item 1, P19 0218/2, UCR Construction and Development Limited, 7 King Street, Sowerby, pages 7 to 48. Myself and Councillor Ransom will now withdraw, and I will be shutting down my video.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fryer. So item 1, application number P/19/0218/2 is going to be presented by Jeremy Eaton. Jeremy, if you'd like to start, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're just waiting for the slides to appear on the screen.
I'm just sharing my screen now. Can you see the slide?
I can. Okay, if everyone can see it, I will proceed, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Please proceed. Yeah, I can see it fine. I'm sure everybody else can as well. Thank you.
Thank you. This application seeks full planning permission for a residential development scheme comprising the conversion of number 7 King Street, Sowerby, into 2 dwellings and the erection of 8 dwellings on adjoining land. In the first instance, I want to bring members' attention to the extras report in respect of late representations received further to the publication of the agenda, but also just for members' information, late representations received today from a local resident and the local MP, Jane Hunt. Just to summarise those quickly, the local resident representation questioned the sort of use of a property and suggested there's an alternative viable use as an existing dwelling, but also disputes the applicant's position regarding the condition of a listed building. It also encloses a public consultation document for another site to the south of Sowerby, which isn't actually relevant to this application. With regard to Councillor Jane Hunt, who's also local MP representation, a request has been received to defer the items 1 and 2 this evening in light of a representation received yesterday from the Parish Council, which is reported in the extras report. Officers have reviewed the letter in question carefully and sought legal advice on it. The position of the Sowerby Neighbourhood Plan and our interpretation of it is outlined in the Officers Committee report and is considered to be correct. Therefore, there is no need to defer items 1 and 2 this evening. And that being said, I will proceed with the presentation. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So the application site is situated to the northwestern side of King Street, located within development limits to the village and district centre of Sowerby. The site includes a residential property of number 7 King Street and adjoining land to the northeast. The application site is adjoined to its southwestern boundary by a residential property of 8 Barrow Road and other commercial uses, and land associated with 8 Barrow Road and other garden land adjoins the northwestern boundary of the site, whilst adjacent to the north eastern and southeastern boundary of the site is number 9 King Street, which comprises of 2 garages, whilst the Midland Main Railway line adjoins the north-eastern boundary of the site. The site is located within the Salby Conservation Area and within an archaeological alert area, and to the southwest of the application site along Barrow Road and High Street is a Church of St Mary, which is a Grade 2 star listed building, and that's indicated by the cursor on the actual plan. The site is also within a sand and gravel mineral safeguarding area. Next slide, please. This slide provides an aerial view of the application site and its surrounding context, further to a previous slide. Next slide, please. This slide indicates the existing site plan for a site, and I'll just run through it quickly. The residential property of 7 King Street is the southern part of the site and comprises a Grade 2 listed building, and that's including the farmhouse and associated single-storey outbuilding to the rear, which is set within a large residential curtilage, which is defined by brick and stone walls of various heights to all boundaries. Albeit it is worth highlighting that the boundary wall fronting King Street and the southeastern boundary of the site has previously been partially removed on health and safety grounds, and therefore is no longer present on site. To the front and rear of the farmhouse are small and large sized gardens respectively, and within the northeastern corner of the site is a further single-storey outbuilding. The farmhouse and associated outbuildings are currently in a poor state of repair due to ongoing issues associated with unauthorised access and antisocial behaviour. The land adjacent to the northeastern boundary of 7 King Street is currently vacant land and includes an existing single-storey building and the remains of a further single-storey building, both understood to have been formerly used in association with agriculture. Access to the site is achieved via an existing vehicle and pedestrian access off King Street, which is shared with the adjacent garage site. Next slide, please. This slide indicates existing floor plans for the farmhouse of 7 King Street. As you can see, accommodation is largely set across both the ground and first floor levels. However, additional accommodation is provided within a basement and second floor level. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the existing elevations of the farmhouse. The dwelling is a 2-storey property with a principal elevation fronting King Street, and to the rear of the main central part of the dwelling is subservient single and 2-storey extensions. Next slide, please. This slide provides a number of viewpoints of the application site and its surrounding built context, starting left to right. The first photograph was immediately taken up on the opposite side of King Street. And as you can see, the farmhouse of number 7 King Street is located behind the hoarding that can be seen in the photograph, with the premises of 5 King Street located to the left-hand side. The second photograph, taken from a similar position, indicates existing site access with the adjacent garage site located on the right-hand side. The third photograph, taken from the northeast along King Street, provides a wider viewpoint of the adjacent garage site, with the land adjoining 7 King Street, part of the application site located behind. The fourth photograph, taken from a similar position, provides a further viewpoint of the northwestern side of King Street, as does the fifth, which is taken from underneath a railway bridge along King Street. The last photograph is taken from the south of the site along King Street, looking towards the site in a northerly direction. Next slide, please. This slide provides some further viewpoints of the site, again starting left to right. The first photograph is taken from the north along High Bridge. Behind the fence line is the Midland Main Railway line, whilst beyond that lies the application site. And in the distance, you can just vaguely see the church tower of the Church of St Mary, which can be seen. The second and third photographs indicate the remains of a front boundary wall, which encloses a front garden to number 7 King Street. The fourth photograph is a front elevation of a farmhouse, which faces onto King Street, and it is a view you would see had the hoarding not been in place. The fifth photograph is of a side elevation of a farmhouse, and the last photograph is of a rear elevation of a farmhouse. Next slide, please. This slide, again, for viewpoints of the application site, and I'll again cover these left to right. The first photograph provides an additional view of the rear elevation of a farmhouse. The second photograph provides a viewpoint of the rear outbuilding. The third photograph provides a view of the northwestern boundary of the application site. and the fourth photograph indicates the outbuilding in the northeastern corner of the site. The fifth photograph is taken between the side elevation of number 7 King Street and the side elevation of the adjacent garage site, and looks up the access track into the site. And the last photograph taken from the end of the access track, looking a view across the site to the northwestern boundary. Next slide, please. This slide indicates some views internally in the site. Again, starting left to right, the first photograph provides a view of the northwestern boundary of the site. The second photograph provides a view towards the northeastern boundary of the site and towards the railway line. And the third photograph just provides a closer up view of the former agricultural building on site. The fourth photograph provides a view towards the remains of the former agricultural building on site and the southeastern boundary. The fifth photograph provides a view of the relationship between the adjacent garage site and the remains of the former agricultural building. And the last photograph on the slide looks at the southwestern boundary of the site and into the curtilage of 7 King Street. And again, a view of the church tower is provided. Next slide, please. This slide indicates the site block plan proposed for a development. With regards to 7 King Street, the farmhouse is proposed to be subdivided and converted to create 2 dwellings. The existing single-storey outbuilding located to the rear of the farmhouse will be retained and converted in order to provide bike storage for both dwellings. Small private gardens will be provided for each dwelling, and a larger area of communal amenity space located to the northwest of the building beyond the communal car parking area, which will provide off-street parking for plots 7A and 7B. It's also proposed to demolish an existing outbuilding located within the northeastern corner of the site, within the curtilage of 7 King Street. With regards to a front boundary wall, this is proposed to be rebuilt on its original alignment and historic foundations and to its original height, with the exception of part of the wall, which is the northeasternmost section adjacent to the site access, which is proposed to be lowered in order to provide visibility space for a site access. With regards to the adjacent land to the northeast, it's proposed to demolish the existing structures on site and erect 8 dwellings, which will comprise of 2 terrace blocks, each of 4 units. Each property will be served with small front and large sized rear gardens, and additional garages will be provided on site, as will appropriate vehicle parking. Access to a site will be achieved via the existing vehicle access off King Street, which will be retained to serve a proposed development. Next slide, please. This slide just demonstrates the access proposed, and as you can see, the visibility displays are marked on, and a section of the wall which is within the visibility display on the left-hand side is indicated there. So that section is slightly within the visibility display, hence the requirement to reduce the height of a replacement wall. Next slide, please. This slide again demonstrates a wall, and the street scene elevation onto King Street on the slide indicates the section of wall to be reduced, and the actual reduction in height of the original height for that section is approximately 40 centimetres. Next slide, please. This slide just briefly indicates how the 2 dwellings will be created by virtue of a conversion and subdivision of the existing farmhouse. Largely, it will involve minimal intervention internally, with infilling of existing openings and creation of some additional openings in order to facilitate the layout. Next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed elevations for a farmhouse. Externally, in addition to the proposed infilling of existing openings and creation of new openings within the rear element of the building, it's proposed to undertake repair and maintenance works to a masonry, a roof of existing building and outbuilding, including terrain water goods and retained fenestration. Next slide, please. This slide indicates the proposed new build dwellings on the adjacent site. Each block will contain 4 3-bedroom dwellings and accommodation set across 2 floor levels. The design generally includes 2 main 2-storey dual pitched elements with 2 projecting single-storey elements, and the material treatment will likely include red bricks for walls, incorporate stone and brick dressings under a plain tiled roof, and incorporate chimney stacks. Next slide, please. This slide just illustrates the floor plans and elevations of the proposed garages. As you can see, there's 3 different types, all of a similar architectural design, and material treatments will be similar to those used in the proposed dwellings. Next slide, please. The first key issue in this case relates to a principle of development. This matter is addressed in detail within pages 22 to 25 of the Officers' Committee report, and is further covered within pages 2 and 4 of the Extras report. The application site is located within the development limits to the village of Salby, as established under Local Plans Policy ST2 and latterly updated under Salby Neighbourhood Plan Policy G1, which modifies these limits, which is identified as a service centre within the settlement hierarchy under Core Strategy Policy CS1. The site also forms a reserve housing site under Neighbourhood Plan Policy H1. Therefore, relevant policies in this case, in respect of the proposed housing development, include Core Strategy Policy CS1, Save Local Plan Policy SD2, and Neighbourhood Plan Policies G1, H1, and H2. As outlined within the committee report, the Council's core strategy and local plan are over 5 years old. As a result, the local planning authority required to utilise the standard methodology in respect to the calculation of its housing requirement for a borough. In light of this, the council can no longer demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. In fact, it's 4.1 years. And as a result of this, any policies which directly relate to a supply of housing within the development plan must be considered out of date, in line with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, and as such cannot be afforded full weight. The shortfall in the supply of deliverable housing sites mean that in accordance with the presumption in favour of sustainable development under paragraph 11D of the NPPF, any adverse impacts caused by a proposal must significantly and demonstrably outweigh its benefits for planning permission to be refused. In situations where a presumption in favour of sustainable development under paragraph 11D of the NPPF applies, consideration should be given to paragraph 14 of the NPPF in relation to neighbourhood plans. With regard to the proposed development, this relates to a provision of new housing on a modest scale within a sustainable settlement. It would not be in conflict with Save Local Plan Policy SD2, Core Strategy Policy CS1, or Neighbourhood Plan Policies G1 and H2. There would be no harm in this regard, and the provision of new housing should be given weight as a benefit in the planning balance. Whilst the proposed development would conflict with Neighbourhood Plan Policy H1, as the terms for releasing this reserved site have not been met, officers consider that the harm caused by the non-compliance with this singular policy would not be significant or demonstrable in either the overall planning balance or in terms of the overall tenor of a set of development policies which determine the principle of proposed development when read as a whole. In summary, officers consider that the proposed development would be in accordance with the balance of those policies which are most relevant to a principle of development, as the development is acceptable in principle, and because it supplies housing for which there is an established need, this must be recognised as a significant benefit of the scheme. Moving on to the next issue, design. With regards to a proposed development in context of number 7 King Street, it's considered that the works proposed to a farmhouse and its associated outbuilding would be in keeping with and would enhance the character and appearance of these existing buildings. Furthermore, they would bring back into use the farmhouse and associated outbuilding into a good state of repair, as would repair maintenance works proposed to the walled rear garden. The proposed reinstatement of the front boundary wall would reinstate an original feature of property and reinforce the sense of enclosure to its front garden, which is currently absent in terms of the street scene views along King Street. Whilst it is to be of a reduced height in part, the uneven appearance is not considered to be visually harmful and would not, in the opinion of officers, merit refusal of planning permission. With regard to a new build element of a proposed development, the layout of the application site and the detailed design of the proposed dwellings, the scale, form, material treatment and appearance would respect the surrounding built context, and is considered that the proposed development would represent a sensitive infill scheme for the application site and would not only enhance the character and appearance of the application site and contribute towards an enhanced street frontage to King Street, but would also represent an acceptable response to a historical context, including the listed building of 7 King Street and the Sarby Conservation Area. Accordingly, it is considered a proposed development would be acceptable on design grounds. Moving on to the next issue, heritage, the committee report addresses this matter in significant detail. The proposed development would result in harm in context of the significance of designated heritage assets, which would include the listed building of 7 King Street, the Sarby Conservation Area, and the Grade 2-star listed Church of St Mary. The harm caused to these designated heritage assets is assessed as less than substantial harm. As a result, and in line with paragraph 196 of the NPPF, the local planning authority are required to weigh up the harm caused to these designated heritage assets against the public benefits of the proposed development. The public benefits in this case are considered to be the economic and social benefits of new housing in the village, alongside the environmental benefits, including ensuring the repair and retention of a listed building and the use of underused brownfield land. In this case, these benefits are considered to outweigh the level of harm identified to the designated heritage assets. Accordingly, it is considered that a proposed development would be acceptable on heritage grounds. Moving on to the next issue, again covered in detail in the officer's report, whilst a proposed development would result in some loss of habitat on site and is a localised biodiversity loss which is considered to be significant for a scale of a site, on-site mitigation is proposed in the form of new landscape planting and the installation of bird and bat boxes within the proposed development. However, the site will be enabled to fully mitigate the ecological impacts of the proposed development. As a result, off-site mitigation will be required, which will be secured by a developer contribution of approximately £5,390, which would be subject to a Section 106 legal agreement or unilateral undertaking. This developer contribution would go towards improving and enhancing biodiversity off-site elsewhere within Sarby, within the locality. And in the extras report, this is covered further, and an identified project has been identified. Accordingly, subject to a planning obligation, it's considered a proposed development would be acceptable on ecological grounds. Moving on to the next issue of highway matters, the local highway authority have assessed the proposal in detail, specifically in respect to the site access and off-street parking and turning facilities. They've outlined no particular concerns with regards to these matters, and neither have objected. And on balance, they consider that the proposal would not lead to a severe impact on the safe operation of a highway in accordance with paragraph 109 of the NPPF. Accordingly, it's considered that the proposed development would be acceptable on highway grounds. Turning attention to the other matters in this case, these are addressed in the officer's committee report. In summary, it's considered that the proposed development would be acceptable in respect to the matters of housing mix, residential amenity, arboriculture, flood risk and drainage, land contaminations, minerals and railway safety. Moving on to a planning balance and conclusion, in terms, for reasons previously summarised and as set out in the officer's committee report, the harm outlined in respect to a conflict of policy H1 of the Sarby Neighbourhood Plan and in context of the identified designated heritage assets are not considered to be significantly or demonstrably outweigh the benefits the proposed development brings in this case. As a result, the proposal is considered to represent sustainable development in line with paragraph 11 of the NPPF. Accordingly, it is recommended that planning permission is granted. There are two recommendations before members this evening. Recommendation A seeks to authorise officers to secure the off-site developer contribution towards improving and enhancing biodiversity off-site under a Section 106 legal agreement or unilateral undertaking. And recommendation B seeks to grant planning permission subject to the planning conditions and informative notes outlined within the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. We have 3 speakers. The first speaker is Jenny Keane, which is agent on behalf of Marans. Can I just ask Jenny to take the chair, please?
So, Jenny, I'm just about to start this timer. Your time, you have 5 minutes and your time starts now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Evening, members, and thank you for allowing me with this opportunity to speak. Hopefully you can recall that we previously wrote to you back in 2018 advising you of my client's intentions to revitalise this vacant and derelict listed building and associated vacant and underutilised land. Since then, my client has engaged proactively and extensively with officers and consultees over the past couple of years to achieve the scheme before you today. A scheme that will provide a positive and sensitive enhancement of this derelict listed building and, importantly, provide the desperately needed investment to bring it back into use. The proposal also secures the sensitive reuse of the wider derelict site, providing a cottage-style development that enhances the character and appearance of that land and respects the historical context of the area. We have revised the design, reduced the number of dwellings by 5, and reconsidered the approach to the wall in order to meet the requirements of officers, consultees, local councillors and residents, and provide a scheme which achieves the best possible solution for all involved. Picking up on the conservation area setting and to provide some comfort, my client has experience with sensitively redeveloping land in conservation areas with high quality housing, and the same will be said for this development. The proposed cottage-style scheme could also be said to be improving the setting of the conservation area by redeveloping this unsightly and derelict site. I do hope you've had time to digest the late representations I have made. I would not usually seek to add any further written commentary post-publication of the officer's report, but I thought it was important for you to hear our views on the neighbourhood plan policy in light of the case law. I'm not going to repeat the content of those comments in full, but we do believe that there are a number of material considerations that clearly outweigh any limited conflict with policy H1 of the neighbourhood plan. The proposal before you today will secure much needed new homes and will assist the council in meeting the housing targets of your new emerging local plan. This is a wholly sustainable site within the existing development limits and district centre of Sowerby. It is also proposed to be allocated for residential development as part of that emerging local plan. Its development would also not prejudice the remaining allocation from coming forward. The scheme is of high quality and will provide a mix of smaller units that are compatible with the character of the area and, importantly, align with the requirements of policy H3 of the neighbourhood plan. Finally, I thought it was worth mentioning that this site can be delivered quickly within 2 years and therefore can help you return to a safe 5-year housing land supply position. I hope that I have demonstrated my client's commitment to the proposed site, and I hope members can appreciate the significant benefits of this scheme and support your officer's recommendation to grant planning permission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jenny. Next speaker, we have Councillor Elizabeth Jones on behalf of Sowerby Parish Council, and you also have 5 minutes.
Right, bear with me. 5 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me clearly? Thank you.
I can hear you.
I'm Councillor Elizabeth Jones, Sowerby Parish Council for Sowerby West, which includes 7 King Street. While we welcome some of the proposals for this development, for example, maintaining the heritage of the house by converting it into 2 dwellings using appropriate materials to be in keeping with its Grade 2 listed status, we still have concerns about the overdevelopment of the rest of the site and the impact this would have on the amount of extra traffic on the already congested King Street and its dangerous junction with the High Street and Barrow Road. We also have concerns about the shared driveway with the neighbouring garage business. The highways have stated that they would like the boundary wall to be lowered to give a better visibility splay. However, they have not taken into account that on the corner of the driveway is a telegraph pole that would negate this visibility splay. They have not taken into account the feelings of the local residents in that the wall should be rebuilt to the original height and be in keeping with the curtilage of a Grade 2 listed building. The Parish Council are also at odds with Charnwood Borough Council's interpretation of H1 and H2 policies from our neighbourhood plan. And as such, we submitted a document from your locale, who helped us with producing the neighbourhood plan, which has been included in the literature for this planning committee meeting. We stand by our interpretation of this housing policy. We would agree with the planning permission being given for the conversion of the farmhouse into 2 dwellings and the reinstatement of the boundary wall to its original height. We do not agree with the rest of the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, we have Councillor Pauline Ransom speaking on behalf of herself as Ward Councillor and Hilary Fryer.
Good evening, Chair. Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can.
Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee and the officers around the table. Thank you very much for allowing myself and Councillor Fryer to actually speak to these applications. These applications have required a lot of reading and assimilation by the committee, and we thank you for your thoroughness on all aspects of this. It is disappointing that due to the COVID-19, sites visits are not possible, but we appreciate all the detail that the officer have provided in the report and the presentation tonight by Officer Jeremy Eaton. The site is important to the village and it is a heritage site and valued very, very highly by the village. There has been a great deal of interest shown from across the village and not just in the close area of the proposed development. We encourage the committee, and I mean encourage the committee, to take due regard to the comments of the Parish Council and other speakers. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ransom. I'm just going to come back to you, Mr. Eaton, see if you'd like to make any comments on what's been said.
Thank you, Chair. In respect of the concerns raised by the Parish Council regarding the overdevelopment of the site, officers have worked with the applicant extensively through this application to address previous concerns of overdevelopment. And we believe the scheme before members this evening is an appropriate response to a site and its constraints and adjoining built context. And we don't believe that the current scheme represents overdevelopment. Regarding the access issue, we've consulted the Highway Authority on the current amended scheme. They are happy with the proposals and haven't outlined a requirement for the telegraph pole, and I believe there's also an adjoining sign next to it to be relocated as part of the proposals. Certainly there's no reference to that in their latest comments, in which case we would consider that that's not necessarily required in order to ensure the access would be safe and meet their requirements. In respect to the interpretation of neighbourhood plan policies, the position of the Parish Council is acknowledged. However, for reasons outlined this evening and within the committee report and extras report, officers are satisfied with our interpretation of those policies in the realm and therefore wouldn't want to make any further comment at this time in respect to that. So I think that covers the pertinent points raised and perhaps points of clarification. But if there's anything else, please do let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. Interestingly, at this point, there is no hands raised whatsoever. Can I ask all councillors if they would like to join in the debate now, whether you could raise your hands? Thank you. Councillor Lowe, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can see one of the speakers, the Parish Council, having concerns about that junction of the road. Did we look at highways and see if anything could be done as far as the highways in that junction?
Mr. Eaton?
Specifically as part of the current application, I'm not aware of highways looking into the junction. I think is it King Street and High Street Barrow Road junction that Councillor Lowe's referring to. I'm not aware of any investigations into looking to improve or alter that access. Obviously, or that junction, sorry. Obviously, as part of this application, we have looked at, or the Highway Authority have looked at highway safety and considered that in light of the existing sort of highway network and opportunities to improve the current access. Bearing in mind, obviously, they have to take into account its current extant use as well. And taking into account, obviously, the heritage concerns of this particular site and the access as a whole, the current scheme in front of you is considered to represent the best solution to cover both elements.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. And thank you, Councillor.
If I may come back. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, Mr. Eaton. I think it's a good opportunity to put back a derelict building. So therefore, I accept officer's recommendation and propose we go along.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe.
Chair, can I just come in? The extras report does propose a slight amendment to recommendation A. Can I just confirm with Councillor Lowe it includes that amendment set out in the extras report, please?
I believe there was two, wasn't there?
There's part A and part B.
Yes, and the extras report just proposes a change to recommendation A, the one that relates to the section 106 legal agreement.
That's allowing officers to go out and sort it out separately.
Yes, but it identifies, I think the extras report identifies that the offsite contribution will go to Cossington Meadow Nature Reserve, which is obviously the closest project to the site that has been identified where the mitigation can take place.
My proposal, Chair, accepts that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lowe. We do have 3 other people with hands up wanting to speak, but at this stage, could I ask if anybody wants to second that proposal of Councillor Lowe? No, not at this stage. Sorry, Jenny Tillotson, Councillor Tillotson, you want to accept that?
Yes, I'm happy to second the
Right, thank you very
Councillor
much.
Lowe's.
Did you want to speak as well at this stage?
Yeah,
just seconding. Yeah.
Just very briefly, just to say, I think it improves what is a derelict site, and so I'm more than happy to second Councillor Lowe's acceptance of officer's recommendation.
Right, thank you very much. Right, so next up we have Councillor Forrest.
I think I was next on the list.
I do apologise, Councillor Tassell, sorry.
Can I refer to page 33 of the document where it's talking about the trees on site? If we are reminded to grant this planning application, that we go ahead with what is, and we put in a condition that what is suggested we go ahead with, which is a which is a landscaping area. Also, it does state that the 5 trees and the three tree groups will be protected under the conservation area. Can I ask if we can put this, that it's not a 5-year condition, but a condition into perpetuity for the trees, so that after 5 years they're not all cut down? Is there, can we bring in the development for the landscaping and everything, please?
Sorry, can I pick this up, please, Chair? Thank you for those inquiries. The 5 years comes as a standard condition. Normally it is to allow the trees to become established. If a tree is going to die, it normally they are sensitive when they're planted, and they do die quite quickly in that period. So it allows the tree to become established in that period. Once the trees are established and they get to a certain size, they would be protected anyway via their position in the conservation area. So I don't think that is necessary So my advice would be that that wouldn't meet the it wouldn't be necessary to make those amendments for those reasons. But obviously it is for members to make the final decision.
The landscaping, can we insist that that is put on as a condition?
Chair, could I just come in at that moment, please, if that's...
Yeah, certainly, carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've just been reading the condition, which is obviously condition 8, which is set out in the report. And clearly all that's, I mean, that is a standard condition to say that, as has just been obviously, Ms Jones has just explained, is that the 5 years is obviously only in there to say that obviously while they're young and they're saplings, that obviously they've got to be replanted. And I think to add anything further to say that they've got to be there in perpetuity when we've already got other legislation that will protect them is over and above really what we could, as what members should be doing, is obviously imposing that additional condition on there. Thank you.
In terms of your question about can we condition that the landscaping is implemented, that is already in place, Councillor Tassell, under proposed condition 7. So that says prior to the occupation of those dwellings, they have to provide us with a scheme of landscaping that we will agree, and there's quite a list of things that should include, and then it says that should be implemented in accordance with the approved details and retained. So that's covered by what you're asking for, is already covered by condition 7.
Very much. Thank you.
Councillor Tassell, did you want to add anything more to that? Are you happy with the response you've been given?
I'm quite happy with the response. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Councillor Forrest to comment next?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very torn by this application. I've known this area of Sarby now for many years, and I would love to see that farmhouse restored into 2 lovely semi-detached houses. It would really enhance that part of the village. What I am concerned though with is the rest of the site. I understand now that the number of houses behind the farmhouse has been reduced to 8 rather than 13, but you've got 8 houses and the 2 semis. That could be up to 20 cars coming out onto what is essentially a pinch point on King Street. They're going to come out onto King Street, which is quite a narrow road, and opposite them are parking bays to service the shops that are there. Then you turn, if you're wanting to go to Barrow, you would then be turning right down to the junction. On one side of the junction, you have the Liberal Club, a very tall building, and on the left-hand side, you have a shop, and in front of you, you have the bulk of St Mary's Church. And I know this from experience, to turn right, you have to be halfway across the road. You have to edge out across the road before you can see what is coming. And that worries me greatly. And I just wonder if there is some mitigation or some assistance for drivers who would be using that junction, even if it's only the old-fashioned device of a mirror, because it is a really very dangerous junction. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Would anybody like to comment on that, Mr. Eaton or Jacqueline Jackson?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just in respect of the access, first of all, obviously, as previously mentioned, we have consulted the local highway authority, and they've not outlined any particular concerns with regards to the design of the site access or in respect of matters of highway safety. And also in respect of paragraph 109 of the NPPF, they haven't outlined that there's severe harm to a highway network. So on that basis, officer's view is the proposed development would be acceptable on the highway safety grounds.
Okay, thank you for that. One more hand raised. It's Councillor Campsell. You're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just like to know a bit
Councillor
more about
Campsell, we can't really hear you very well. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well. You're very, very quiet.
Any better now?
Not really. No, no.
Okay,
Still
what's
can't hear
happened
you
there?
very well.
Any better now? I can't hear you now.
Councillor Campsell, we can hear you. It's just that you're very quiet. So maybe if you just speak louder.
I'll speak up.
Thank you, Councillor Campsell. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Councillor Campsell.
Okay, I'll just talk about the bird boxes that have you're going to put up and bat boxes. I just want to make sure that bird box wise, will there be swift bricks we can have built into the houses? Because that's the sort of wildlife that you see flying about the village, you see. And then I just wanted to talk about the 5,500 that's going elsewhere. I would have thought that would have been better spent around the village, you know, say at the local school or at the park up the road. We could do some community orchards or something like that. Instead of you know, any chance of an orchard being planted in Selby. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Campsell. I think that there's already been a place identified where the money is to be spent, and that's already been proposed. Can I just bring in Jacqueline Jackson?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just clarify that. Obviously, the mitigation has to provide a biodiversity improvement to mitigate the impacts on site. The problem with just saying, can we have a community orchard? There is no identified land or landowner that's prepared to deliver that we know about at this time. What we do have is a nature reserve already within the locality where the landowners have been engaged and a project has been identified, which would be a pond creation project, which we know would deliver the biodiversity benefits that would offset the impact on site. In terms of the bird boxes, I'm not sure if we know the details of the type of bird boxes or whether that's needs to be approved. So I'll turn to Jeremy for that. But if it is that we need to approve the type of bird box, then we can look at taking your comments with regards to Swifts on board.
Thank you. Jeremy, would you like to add to that?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just so members are aware, the dealing with the bird and bat boxes is part of the ecological mitigation on site. That's actually covered under condition 13, in which case the detail of that will be agreed in the event that obviously members grant planning permission this evening.
Right, thank you very much.
Just to come back in then, now that's been clarified, Councillor Campsell, given it has to be agreed, what I suggest we do, or what members might want to consider, is add in an informative saying that it's considered that you'd like to see Swift boxes incorporated as part of that condition, just so that the applicant is aware that that is a desire of the parish council. So that could be added as an informative, just to so it's taken on board.
Thank you. Could you
Yes, thank you for that. Councillor Campsell, do you want to add anything further to that?
Yeah, just that the bird boxes, if they're like sparrows or blue tits, need cleaning every year, you see, so that would need managing, whereas Swift boxes don't need cleaning, and so they could be there forever and in use, sort of thing.
Okay, thank you for that. Will that be taken on board? Mr. Eaton, can you just come back on that, please?
If members wish for that to be added as an informative and are happy for officers to deal with the wording prior to granting of consent in the event that you were minded to grant consent, then that is something we can add in.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, well, we've had a proposal by Mark Lowe, seconded by Councillor Tillotson. Sorry, Jackie Jackson's hands up, I believe. So, Jackie, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, to add the informative, it does have to form part of the proposal. So you'll need to go back to Councillor Lowe to make sure he's happy to add that to his proposal or not. You know, it can't be just added without it being added to the proposal on the table.
Thank you for that.
Like,
You're right.
Chair, I agree with that.
Councillor Lowe, are you happy to include the... Okay, he's nodding. Can you actually say the words, please? You're muted.
I'm happy to include that, Chair.
And I'm
Thank you
happy
very
as
much.
well, Chair. Councillor Tillotson, I'm happy as well.
Thank you, Councillor Tillotson. Right, I'm going to read out everybody's names. As with the chair before me, I'm not going to use the councillor title before your name. So I'm going to start off with Councillor Campsell. I need to know whether you're for, against or abstain.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Capleton.
I'm for, Chair.
Charles.
For the proposal, Chair.
Forrest.
I will abstain, please, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Councillor Mark Lowe.
For, Chair.
Savage.
For, Chair.
Tassel.
For, Chair.
Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for.
And Ward.
Abstain, Chair.
Thank you. I make that 8 for and 2 abstentions. Can I just check that somebody agrees with those figures, please?
And Chair, I agree with you. It was 8 for and 2 abstentions. So that's the recommendation.
My apologies. I didn't vote myself. I'm for.
So to clarify, that's 9 for and 2 against.
Thank you very much. That item is carried.
Chair, I thought that was 2 abstentions, not against.
Sorry, it was 9 for and 2 abstentions. Can somebody, you agree with that?
I agree. It was 9 for and 2 abstentions.
Yes,
Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Me again.
Right, next item, item 2, P//19/0313/2. This is being presented again by Jeremy Eaton. Mr. Eaton, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for the presentation to be uploaded. This application seeks listed building consent for a conversion of a Grade 2 listed farmhouse at 7 King Street, Salby, into 2 dwellings, the conversion and demolition of existing outbuildings, the repair and maintenance of the northeastern boundary wall, and the partial rebuilding of the front boundary wall to a southeast boundary. And it is associated with a planning application which members have just considered. Next slide, please. The application site relates to the same site that members considered on the previous application. However, in this case, of the listed building consent application, the application site specifically relates to a residential property of 7 King Street, which comprises a Grade 2 listed building. Next slide, please. This slide provides an aerial view of the application site and its surrounding context. Next slide, please. This slide indicates the existing site plan for the application site, which members have previously seen when considering the previous application. For the members' interest, the residential property of 7 King Street comprises a two-storey detached farmhouse with associated single-storey outbuilding to a rear, set within a large curtilage, which is defined by brick and stone walls of various heights to all boundaries, albeit in the case of a front boundary wall to a southeastern boundary of the site, this is no longer present on site, having previously been removed on health and safety grounds. Next slide, please. This slide indicates existing floor plans of the farmhouse of 7 King Street, which again members have seen previously. Next slide, please. This slide indicates existing elevations of the farmhouse. Again, members have seen this previously, and so next slide, please. This slide indicates a number of viewpoints of the site, which members have seen, in which case I don't consider it necessarily need to sort of go through those in detail again. But as you can see, the property of number 7 King Street is highlighted in those photographs. Next slide, please. This relates to the same slide. Members have seen these particular photographs again, and so I won't cover them again. Next slide. Equally, in respect to this slide, members have previously seen the photographs, so we can move on. These photographs cover the adjoining site, in which case members have seen them previously. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the layout of the application site and remains the same as that of the previous application. As a result, I'll go through this in the next few slides quite quickly. Obviously, this slide demonstrates the site access and the work specifically in respect of the boundary wall, and the next slide as well, which covers the wall in detail and indicates the element of wall which is to be reduced in height, and obviously the wall is proposed to be reinstated to a property. Next slide, please. Again, members have seen this slide previously, and it relates to the proposed floor plans of the farmhouse as proposed. Next slide, please. And this slide again shows the elevations proposed, which members saw on the last application. So we'll move on, please. Sorry, these slides aren't particularly relevant to this application. So we'll just, if we can move on. In this case, because the application is for listed building consent, the main issue in this case is the impact of a proposed development on the significance of a designated heritage asset, i.e. the Grade 2 listed building at 7 King Street. The committee report addresses this matter in significant detail, in which case I only intend on summarising the key elements of the assessment outlined within the committee report. In this case, it's considered that a proposed development would result in harm in context of the significance of the designated heritage asset, number 7 King Street. The harm caused to this heritage asset is assessed as less than substantial harm. As a result, and in line with paragraph 196 of the NPPF, the local planning authority are required to weigh up the harm caused to this designated heritage asset against the public benefits of the proposed development. The public benefits in this case are considered to be the economical social benefits of new housing in the village, alongside the environmental benefits, including ensuring the repair and retention of the listed building, and obviously the associated use of adjoining land, as well as the improvement of site access in the interest of highway safety. In this case, these benefits are considered to outweigh the level of harm identified to the designated heritage asset. It is considered that a proposed development would be in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Town and Country Planning Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990, and would also be in accordance with the relevant provisions of the NPPF and policy CS14 of the Charnwood Local Plan Core Strategy. Therefore, the recommendation for members this evening is one of approval of listed building consent, subject to the planning conditions and informative notes outlined within the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eaton. I'm not okay. Can I just ask Jacqueline Jackson, do we actually have any speakers on this?
So, Chair, yes, we have got speakers on this particular item. Yes, we have got the agent, I believe, is speaking again, the Parish Council, and I believe Councillor Ranson wants to just repeat what she was going to say. So, I was going to bring them in.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Thanks for clarifying that. I'll call Jenny Keane, agent on behalf of Marans first, please. And you've got 5 minutes again, same as last time. Thank you.
So I'm about to start the clock now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this one much shorter, as you have already heard most of the details of this case as part of the previous application. I really just wanted to pick up on a few points in the officer's report. Obviously, this is vacant and a derelict listed building, which is in much need of investment to bring it back into use. And in its current state of disrepair, it's not fulfilling its real value within the street scene. As I've said before, my client has engaged proactively and extensively with the council's conservation and planning officers to achieve this scheme that will repair and provide a positive but sensitive enhancement of the derelict listed building, bringing it back into use. Any conversion of the farmhouse would require suitable and safe access, and therefore the access solution would need to be found for any development that comes forward. This solution that we've come to in agreement with officers and the Highways Authority is the solution that results in the least harm, and obviously is the position that officers were keen on, hence why we changed our stance on it. We have acknowledged the less than substantial harm, but we agree with officers that this slight and minor harm is considerably outweighed by the substantial economic, social and environmental public benefits as summarised in the officer's report. I hope again that I've demonstrated my client's commitment to the proposed site, and I hope that members can appreciate the significant benefits again and adhere to your officer's recommendation to grant listed buildings consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could call Councillor Elizabeth Jones on behalf of Sarby Parish Council. Thank you. Again, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I said originally, we support the conversion of the farmhouse into 2 dwellings, and we support the use of appropriate materials for this conversion. So we have no worries about that. We know that the council will keep a really close eye on the fact on it being converted sympathetically. We still state, as before, that the wish of the residents of the area would be to retain the wall to its original height, which is at odds with what the highways have said for the visibility display. I think that's all I've got to say on that matter, that we do support the conversion of the listed building into 2 dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could call Councillor Pauline Ranson, who's speaking on both on behalf of herself and Hilary Fryer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee and officers. I've got nothing further from a previous statement except that I would like to reiterate that, please, we encourage you to actually take due regard of what the Parish Council have actually, the speaker has actually, and other speakers have actually said, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ransom. I've got one hand up at the moment. That's Councillor Tassell. Would you like to carry on?
Listening to all the debate and what have you, I think it's a very, very good opportunity to keep a house that is gradually going into a state of degradation. So therefore, I would like to go with the officer's recommendation and propose that we grant them permission.
Thank you for that. Although Councillor Tillotson's hand's up next, does anybody want to second that proposal, or indeed do you want to second it, Councillor Tillotson?
I'd second it, Chair.
Councillor Lowe, I've got you down as seconding it. Councillor Tillotson?
Yeah, I do support the application, but I have got a couple of questions actually. On page 55, under Salby Parish Council objections, the last bullet point there is about archaeological remains. Is there any evidence that there may be archaeological remains that ought to be investigated? Is my question to officers. And my second, I'm a bit puzzled really. We've heard that from Councillor Forrest that there are issues of traffic and that it's quite a dangerous exit. And we've heard that transport want the wall to be lower than it was originally. So I am puzzled why there are objections to that from local people. And I don't know whether we can answer, whether officers can answer that. So those are my questions really.
Thank you for that, Councillor Tillotson. Which officer would like to come back on that?
I'm happy to, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
In respect to the archaeology, the site is within an archaeological alert area and is referred to within the conservation area character appraisal as potential for below grounds archaeological remains, as well as obviously the interest in the house above ground. So notwithstanding that, we obviously assess that as part of the planning application and in respect to this current application. In respect of below ground archaeology, that's not part of the listed building itself, and obviously was covered under a planning application, and that within the previous item and list of conditions was a condition related to archaeology. In respect of this current application, which is a listed building consent, there is a proposed archaeological related condition in respect of the survey and recording of the existing outbuilding to be removed within the site. So that is probably covered under that particular condition. In respect to the access, obviously I previously covered that particular matter on the planning application, and obviously related the position of the Highway Authority. They deemed a requirement for the wall to be lowered in order to provide visibility space and therefore improve the existing site access. And therefore, that is how we've sort of moved forward with the application in terms of the original scheme and sought amendments accordingly. Clearly, members have already approved that access under the planning application. So it's whether or not listed building consent should now be granted for the works to that particular element of a wall, as opposed to the wider access proposals.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Eaton. Can we just clarify again, sorry, the height it's going to be reduced by and how much of it in length? And perhaps for those of us who probably think more in old imperial sizes, probably just give an indication of what it might be in feet and inches.
In terms of the reduction in height from its original height, the relevant section of the wall is going to be 40 centimetres lower. I don't know what that would be in feet without doing a conversion, unfortunately, Chair, but I'm happy to do so if you require it. In terms of the relevant section, in terms of the length of the wall to be lowered, I would just need to check on the drawings before actually being able to position to comment on that. So if you can bear with me a second, I'll just look to do that.
If I just come in to help explain it, Chair, it was just on the presentation slide. So if you remember from the presentation slide, in the centre of the front wall, there's a pedestrian access gate. It would be to the side of that pedestrian access gate up to the corner of the wall before it returns back to the house. That's the section that would be reduced in height.
Thank you for that. I've
40
got
40
Sorry?
centimetres is just under 16 inches.
yes. Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Tassel. I was actually
I-
holding up a tape measure showing that it was 16 inches.
Can I ask, Chair, before we move on, how high was the original wall?
Mr. Eaton.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just checking the drawings as we speak, just to clarify the 2 points raised. Bear with me a second, please. So the wall was approximately just shy of 0.8 meters in height, and the section. Bear with me. I'm just having to work to different scales on the drawings, so I've just got to calibrate it. Bear with me a second.
I think we put it in the report, Jeremy. I'm just trying to find it.
So from what you're saying, it was 80 centimetres high, and we're reducing it by 40 centimetres, so it's going to be 40 centimetres high, 16 inches.
No, that's
no, it's
no. Those figures are wrong. I'm sorry, Mr. Eaton.
So the length for a wall is approximately 7.64 meters in length, and the height of the wall, sorry, is approximately 1.2 meters, and it would now be just less than
So it's going to be about 90
0.8.
centimetres. Yeah. Fine.
So the finished wall. So the finished wall would be 0.75 meters.
Yeah.
It says that on page 50 of your committee report. So the wall to be replaced in that reduced height section would be 0.75 centimeters, which is 0.4 meters less than it was originally. And that's on the bottom of page 50 of your reports.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. And for those of us who's thinking old money, that's 2 foot 6 inches. Councillor Tassel.
Sorry, I don't want to speak anymore.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not showing. Oh, sorry, Councillor Tassel, you've come back on again. No, you've
Sorry,
gone
I'm
off.
trying to lower my hand.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. Nobody else is showing to speak, although Councillor Camsel's hand flashed up for a moment. Councillor Camsel, did you want to come back?
Well, I was just mentioning the wall. It's about 21 foot long and 4 foot high at the minute. That's all it is.
Yes, thank you very much. Right, thank you. So this has been proposed by Councillor Tassel, seconded by Mark Lowe. I'm now going to put this to the vote, unless the officers want to add anything else before. No, thank you very much. So I'm going to start with Councillor Campsell.
For Chair.
I'm sorry, Councillor Campsell.
For.
Thank you. Capleton.
For, Chair.
Charles.
For, Chair. Thank you.
Forrest.
And for, Chair, thank you.
Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Lowe.
For, Chair.
Savage.
For, Chair.
Tassel.
For, Chair.
Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Ward.
For, Chair.
And I'm also for. That's unanimous, but can we just ask somebody to verify that for me, please?
I verify that, Chair. That is unanimous.
Thank you very much. So this one is passed as well. I'm now going to, it's now nearly 6:30, but it's 6:25. We're going to have a recess for 5 minutes, but if we could make it 5 minutes, please. And we'll come back on at 6:30. Just give everybody a chance to have a quick whatever. Thank you very much.
Okay, and everyone turn the microphones off, please. Thank you.
A break. Does Daddy not seem to be ringing?
No. I'm
Councillor Forrest checking in.
Karen, are you there?
Yes, I am. I am here.
Thank you. Can you let in Councillor Hilary Fryer and Councillor Ransom, please?
Yeah, I'll ask them to turn their videos on.
I'm in actually, Karen.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. I'll just give it a few more seconds to allow everybody else to return to the meeting.
Oh, yes, you've got me now. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we just got 2 more people. Ed and Sally, are you with us?
Oh, here, Chair.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I'm now handing the meeting back over to Hilary Fryer, who will chair the rest of the meeting.
Right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for all your hard work considering those 2 applications. We're now moving on to item 3, planning application 3, which is P19 0041 to William Davis Limited, Land off Melton Road, Burton, on the Wolds, pages 64 to 87. I don't think there's any declarations of interest. But so, Ed, can you confirm we had no declarations of interest for this, did we? No. Right. So we'll now move over to Karen Brightman to give us the presentation, please, and to clarify exactly what we are discussing tonight. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just, while I'm waiting for the slides to come up, I'll just point out to members what this item is about. It's basically, it involves an outline planning application for 70 dwellings with all matters reserved other than access. But in this instance, the council hasn't made a decision on the application within the agreed time limit, and as a result the applicant has appealed against non-determination. So the decision before members tonight isn't whether to grant or refuse planning permission, it's whether they would have granted or refused planning permission, which then goes on to form the basis for how we defend the appeal that is already with us and due to be heard later this year at a public inquiry. Next slide, please. This is where the site's located. So you'll see the red outline around the site on the edge of the village of Burton on the Wolds. Souters Lane runs along the western boundary there. Melton Road runs across the top. And then at the bottom of the site to the south there is a development of some slightly newer housing, which is Seals Close. And you'll also see there are some areas outlined in blue there. Those are areas that the applicant has control over, but are not included in the actual planning application site. Next slide, please. This just shows where the site's located on an aerial photograph. It's obviously depicted by the yellow star there. You'll see that there is, as the location plan showed, there's development to the south and there's development to the west on the opposite side of Souters Lane. Next slide, please. Now, this is a series of photographs taken of the site. They're recent photographs of the site to help members because we're unable at the moment, obviously, to visit the sites. Now, this particular photograph is taken from Souters Lane across the site. So you can see the Eaton Works in the background there. And you can also see behind the sheep the belt of relatively new planting, and that's in the blue area that we saw on the location plan. So it's within the control of the applicant, but not within the site. Next slide, please. This slide just shows you again looking across the site, and there you can see the backs of the properties on Seals Close that adjoin the southern boundary and the various boundary treatments that define their gardens. Next slide, please. This again is a shot from Souters Lane across the site. It's angled slightly more towards Melton Road just to show you the trees and the hedging and the vegetation that screen the site from Melton Road itself there across the front. Next slide, please. This is just a close-up of the boundary between the site and Seals Close, and I've just included it to show you that there is quite extensive hedging and some mature hedgerow trees along that boundary in parts. Next slide, please. This is the frontage of the site, so this is standing on Melton Road looking towards the site. You can see there that there's an area of allotments. That's where you can see the polytunnels that are behind the road hedge. Then there's another hedge that's a bit more overgrown behind that. And then glimpsed through there is the field that we were looking at earlier. And then you can just make out in the background there the housing on Seals Close just behind that. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of images taken from Seals Close itself, just for completeness, really. You obviously can't see the site in the bottom one of those because it's behind the houses that you can see there. Next slide, please. These are shots taken along Souters Lane. So the one on the left is taken looking out towards Melton Road. So you've got the site to your right there. And on the left, there is the poultry farm that's on the opposite side of the road. The right-hand slide is just the same thing in reverse. So the site there is on the left-hand side. It's just to give you an idea of the character of the area. Next slide, please. This, for completeness, is the poultry farm itself, just so you can see what that looks like. And you can just make out some slightly newer housing there, which is part of Burton on the Wolds that sits behind that farm. Next slide, please. Turning to the issues that are raised in the committee report. The first fundamental issue, and I do need to just remind members at this point again, that what we are looking at tonight isn't making a decision on the application, it's deciding what we would have decided or what you would have decided if the application had come before you and we weren't in the grounds where we were looking at an appeal. So in terms of principle, we've already been into some of these issues tonight. Our development plan policies, which include those in the core strategy, the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, where they are concerned with allocating housing, because at this current time we don't have a 5-year supply of housing land, those policies are considered to be out of date. And as a result, the weight that's ascribed to them is reduced. And there's been much talk already this evening of a tilted balance that the framework requires us under 11D to enter into. And that means that there is a presumption that we would have granted planning permission unless there are significant and demonstrable harms that outweigh the benefits of the scheme. Obviously, there are development plan policies, and it's not saying that there's no weight to those. It's just saying that they have reduced weight and they only count, they go into that balance. So we consider whether anything that's at odds with those reduced weight policies would outweigh the benefits of the scheme. And it's officers' view, and you'll see this from the report, that in this case, those benefits, which are quite significant, they're the provision of 70 houses at a time when we're in great need of housing to meet our supply. In terms of principle, there isn't anything that outweighs that, despite the fact that there obviously is some conflict with these policies. So that's officers' stance on that. In terms of affordable housing, again, we're not considering the decision in the classic way, and we also need to be mindful that this is an outline application. However, there is an indication that the applicant would be willing to provide 40% affordable housing, which is in compliance with our core strategy policies. The mix of those houses, of both affordable and the market houses, hasn't been established because we're not looking at that level of detail at this point. But we could easily, if we had have been considering the application, we could have put a condition on that would have tied that down to parameters that meant that we were securing a mix that met our local need. Next slide, please. Landscape and visual impact is obviously something that could be a significant and demonstrable harm. So members would need to think about whether they would have had or whether they feel there's an issue here. We've looked at the visual assessment that was submitted with the application, and we've done our own assessment around that. It's our view that in terms of landscape, there is relatively limited impact other than in terms of very localized impact within the site itself. Now, that's not atypical in any situation where you've got a previously undeveloped open area of land and you're developing it with housing. You're obviously going to have impact on that local landscape. There's also a further smaller impact in that there is some ridge and furrow on the site that is recognised in the Wolds character area as a landscape characteristic that's quite typical of the Wolds, and that would obviously be lost as an in situ. It could be preserved and recorded, but it would be lost as a landscape feature. So there is a small element of landscape harm there. In terms of visual impacts, the next few slides will show you various images of the site to help you with your assessment of that. But in terms of how we've looked at it, we felt that there are some visual impacts from Souters Lane itself. That's inevitable. It's very close to the site. You can see the site quite extensively from there, particularly through gaps in the hedge or even over the hedge at certain times of the year. And there are also some visual impacts when you look at the site from the bridleway or the right of way, that's situated to the east. But those would be mitigated and would reduce quite substantially over time as the planting belt that we looked at earlier matures. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Could we just, I think we've skipped. Yes. Oh, yeah. This slide is just a series of panoramas. Again, it's just to give you a bit of an indication as to the visual and the landscape impacts that the proposal would have. The top one is a panorama taken from Melton Road. So you can see it's labelled up there, Souters Lane there with the arrow. And the site is approximately where that red line across the top of the shot is. Second panorama is very similar. That's taken from close to the junction of Wymeswold Lane and Burton and Melton Road. And then the bottom panorama there is taken from Souters Lane across the site, and that's where it's been identified there would be the greatest visual harm. Next slide, please. These, the next three slides actually are distance shots showing the landscape. So you'll see there on the right-hand side, they're taken from where the yellow blob is on the map. So this is a shot from Melton Road looking in towards Burton on the Wolds and the site. And again, the red bar shows you where the site extent is, and the photograph at the bottom just sort of zooms in on that area within the yellow square, just to give you a bit more detail. So that's Melton Road itself. Next slide, please. This is the same thing. This is taken from the right of way that we talked about. So it just sort of shows you that you would see the site from there, but as the planting matures, that would get less and less of an impact. Next slide, please. And this is a distant view from the south. So it's just to give you an idea of, and it gives you a good idea, I think, of how small a scale the site is in the general rolling Wolds landscape, which is why we've reached the conclusion that in terms of that, in terms of harm on that as a character area overall, that would be pretty limited. Next slide, please. This is the illustrative layout that was submitted. I need to point out that that's illustrative, which means it's not been, it wouldn't have been submitted for approval if you were considering whether to approve it or not. It's just an indication of how the site might be developed. So it's fairly simple. It's showing blocks of housing. The yellow stars are suggested focal buildings. The pink star is a suggested play area. And then you'll notice in the far southwest corner there, where they've shown a possible site for a community orchard and maybe some allotments, that area is kept free of development. The reason for that is the poultry farm across the road produces, as you might expect, some odour and some noise. And the studies that have been submitted with the application show that the odour and the noise would be or the odour primarily, I should say, would be harmful in that corner, but beyond that, it wouldn't result in harm to the amenity of any future residents. So that's helped shape the scheme. And there's also an area next to the allotments that has some surface water flooding issues, and that's shown as an area for SUDS, but we'll come to that later when we just briefly look at drainage. So just to recap, this is an illustrative layout because this is an outline planning application, and just another reminder that that members aren't being asked to make a decision on the application tonight, only to decide what they would have done with it if they'd been in that position. Next slide, please. This is a shot of the access. Now that is included as a matter to be considered under this under this outline application. So you'll see it's the standard T-junction onto Melton Road. The Highway Authority have commented on the application. They're satisfied that the access is safe and that there is capacity in the road network to deal with the traffic that the proposal would generate. And they also are of the opinion that the site makes the most of its location in terms of sustainability. So there is a bus service, albeit a limited one. It would be possible to produce packs for residents, which is a fairly standard condition on a lot of new developments, to encourage them to use that bus service. And there are also proposals to improve the footpath links with the village, both along Melton Road and also with some potential access points out onto Souters Lane. Obviously layout, so things like parking, the width and the design of the roads, that wouldn't have been up for consideration at this point anyway. That would be something for a later reserved matters application to deal with if this had been approved. Next slide, please. This is just for reference, really. It's just to show you the box on the right shows where there are trees and groups of planting on the site. So you'll see that most of those are around the periphery of the site, and indeed most of them would be unaffected by the development. There might be some small sections of hedgerow on Souters Lane that would need to be removed to allow the pedestrian access points. But obviously where the vehicular access goes in, on the left-hand box, there are, I think it's 4 trees, it does say in your report, there are 4 trees that would need to be removed there, and also some hawthorn bushes to allow that access in. None of those trees are protected, and 2 of them are poor quality and the others are sort of medium quality ash trees. Next slide, please. This just shows you, it's a very colourful plan, shows you the drainage strategy for the site. Just need to stress it, the site is within flood zone 1. which means it's at low risk of flooding itself. As I think I touched on earlier, there is an area just to the north where there are some surface water drainage issues. And as a result, there's no development proposed there. There is, in fact, a detention basin proposed in that location. The crux of how the drainage would work is that there's some blue areas shown there, which are permeable paving. Those would drain into the detention basin, and then the detention basin itself releases water into the brook, but it does so at a controlled rate, so it wouldn't exceed greenfield runoff. Now that drainage strategy has been backwards and forwards a few times between the applicant and ourselves and the flooding authority or the local flood authority at Leicestershire County, and they are happy that and satisfied that that would drain the site in a way that doesn't create drainage issues elsewhere. Next slide, please. This slide just shows infrastructure requests that were made for the application and ones that we feel are still compliant, so they would be necessary to make the development sustainable and to meet our policies. I've included these here just as a summary, although they are all in the report and they're dealt with in more detail in the report. But the reason I've added them here is it is important to just keep these in mind, because this application hasn't been determined and it's in fact been halted in its tracks really by the submission of an appeal, that these haven't been negotiated with the applicant. There isn't any indication that the applicant wouldn't be willing to make these contributions, and in fact they've made it quite clear that the affordable housing would be something that they would be doing. But we don't actually have a signed 106 agreement or anything that is fine, that gives us any sense of security over these amounts at the moment. So I just want you to keep that in mind when we get to the recommendation slide later on. Next slide, please. There's three other things here that I've just picked out that are in the report, so I won't go into them in a great deal of detail. Heritage, need to be mindful of the fact that it is an archaeological area. However, if members had been in a position where they were determining the application, they could have submitted or they could have included conditions to protect that archaeology. Similarly, with the ridge and furrow landscape, not in its landscape context, but in terms of the context of it as a heritage feature, there would be measures that could be utilised to preserve and record that, so that its history wasn't completely lost if the site were to be developed. Ecology, again, if members had been determining, it would have been entirely possible to put conditions on that would have actually secured ecological gain. And the final point there, it relates to soils, and I do need to point out that the site is grade 3A, which is best and most versatile, agricultural land. And that obviously does count against the development in terms of any sort of planning balance type exercise, but you do need to be mindful that it's a very small site in terms of the scale of loss of grade 3A, and that there's no evidence that loss of this site would disrupt any sort of larger agricultural holdings. So those are things just to keep in mind there. So with all that in mind, and just yet another reminder that we're not actually determining, or members aren't determining the application, but you have to think what the planning balance that you might have used would have been, and where that maybe would have taken you. The planning balance itself, we've talked about the benefits of the scheme. They are the 70 homes. They are the fact that those would be provided at a time when we very much need them. They would, in all likelihood, include affordable housing at policy compliant rates. There aren't any clear technical issues to the scheme that couldn't be overcome by way of conditions. But there are some harms. There was some limited landscape harm, some visual harm, particularly in the close vicinity of the site. There's obviously loss of some best and most versatile agricultural land. And there is, of course, conflict with the neighbourhood plan policies and some of the development, some of the core strategy policies. But it is officers' view, having looked at all those and taking them in the round, so putting them together, that in this current situation where Charnwood is really keen and really needing to find new houses, that those in themselves don't constitute a significant demonstrable harm that would outweigh those benefits. However, and this is where it does get a little bit complicated, so bear with me, because there isn't currently a Section 106 agreement in place, and it hasn't gone along the line far enough for us to know with any certainty that it can be secured, we are nevertheless recommending that without that agreement, the development would be unsustainable because it requires those elements of infrastructure to make it sustainable. But I do need to be really clear here that if members follow our recommendation, which is that they conclude they would refuse planning permission, but only on the grounds set out in the report, which is that there's no Section 106 agreement, that is something of a technicality, because if that was the recommendation, as part of the appeal process, we would then have to go on to negotiate with the applicants over the Section 106. It's likely, not absolutely certain, but it's likely that we would reach an agreement and be able to reach a signed Section 106 between us. And as a result, that reason for refusal would fall away. So with the officer recommendation as it stands, we wouldn't really be defending the appeal beyond negotiating the Section 106 agreement. I hope that's clear, but if there's any questions at all, obviously feel free to ask me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. It is quite complicated, this paper that's come in front of us, but we have two speakers. On behalf of the Parish Council of Burton-on-the-Wolds, Coates and Pressfield, I call on Mr. Robert Shields. And you have 5 minutes, Mr. Shields, and you will be informed when there's 1 minute left. Karen will tell us when you can start. Can you hear and see us, Mr. Shields?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Your time is about to start now. Thank you.
Thank you. I've heard what the officer has said this evening, and I was going to thank officers for the recommendation that put forward, but I'm not quite sure that I'm going to do that now, because it would appear that despite the recommendation before you, the officer is quite sure that this can be negotiated away, and therefore the appeal may not go ahead. So I'd like members to consider whether this recommendation is robust enough going forward to an appeal before an inspector to support the refusal. Nowhere in the presentation has it been mentioned that within the existing local plan and in fact the emerging local plan, Burton on the Wolds is categorised as an other settlement. In other words, it is only suitable for small-scale infill development to meet local needs. This is because the village does not have a good range of services. In fact, it has very poor services or any other facilities for residents, and they have to rely on the private car for day-to-day travel needs. A bus service has been mentioned. That travels once an hour if you're lucky, not past 6 o'clock in the evening, not on weekends, other than Saturday mornings, backwards and forwards to Melton. And through to Loughborough. That's rather unfortunate because most of the services that the village relies on are in other directions, like towards Eastleigh through Wymeswold or to Barrow upon Soar, where we're all forced to go to doctor's surgeries, etc. Also, it's not been mentioned that Burton on the Wolds is seen as a totally unsustainable location for this type of development. There was a previous application a year or so ago on Loughborough Road, and the main reason that that was refused was on sustainability. There were some other issues there which went towards listed buildings and Presswold Hall and things like that, which this site doesn't have. I think to dismiss ridge and furrow in the terms of, oh, it can be recorded, is a little bit naive. Once it's gone, and we've lost so much ridge and furrow and that sort of environment within the Wolds. That is why the neighbourhood plan that I chaired was very specific in wanting to preserve this type of location. And talking about the neighbourhood plan looked at this site and many others within the plan area, and it was considered the most suitable site if we were to have houses, was the chicken or poultry farm that's been mentioned, which is on the other side of Souters Lane. Quite a large area of that is Second World War buildings. The rest is somewhat newer, and the operator of that site and owner of that site are quite receptible to finding another site and moving on so that that could be developed for probably half the amount of houses that that are proposed here. You were shown houses to the south of this site, and you were only told about the new ones. Well, most of the houses up there are old. Most of the houses up there are over 70 years old because they were Second World War accommodation for the Air Force that operated out of Wymeswold Airfield. And if that hadn't happened, that particular development wouldn't be there.
Time is up, I'm afraid.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker we have is Councillor, Borough Councillor, Councillor Boker, the Ward Councillor. Can you hear us? Yes, there you are. Again, you have 5 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want my image or is the voice enough?
No, voice only for speakers in Plans Committee, and I'm just about to start the timer now.
Okay,
thank you.
Committee, thank you for listening to me this evening. I agree with everything that Councillor Robert Shields had said, and I think you need to think very carefully I don't disagree with the officer's recommendation to refuse, but I share the same concerns as Councillor Shields, which in this instance, I think the neighbourhood plan, which Burton on the Wolds with Houghton has spent 2 years and a lot of money on, has been totally ignored. In the past, sites in Burton on the Wolds have been refused on non-sustainability. And as Councillor Shields says, we are supposed to be only having infill in the Wolds villages. I think if you...
Can we add to the reasons for refusal?
Pardon? Well,
Sorry.
that's what I'm going to suggest. So, sorry, Chair, that's what I was going to suggest. So, if you think about this, if we now are going to only refuse this based on a 106 agreement, what you're actually saying is that this can go ahead as long as they meet the 106 requirements, which then sets a precedent, because obviously the villages in the Wolds, like Burton and Wymeswold, are surrounded by land that landowners are quite willing to give up for development, which means that if you don't refuse this based on sustainability, we will end up with a load of people, developers, putting in applications saying, as long as you accept our 106 proposals, then these can happily go ahead. So I'm a little bit worried that we're not refusing this based on sustainability and the fact that in our local plan, we are defined as other settlements. And therefore there seems to be a bias to allow this application as long as the developers come up with a suitable 106 agreement. Well, isn't that just saying, yes, you can go ahead as long as you pay us the money? So can I emphasize to you that you must think about the reasons for refusal on this application. And as the chair suggests, I do not think it's adequate to refuse it based just on a 106 agreement, when other applications in Burton have been refused on sustainability, highways, and other such considerations. And I think the planning officer needs to tell the committee what those other reasons for refusals could be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I was
that's all
talking
right.
to myself.
I'm glad you did.
No, I was talking to myself, and I was just asking myself a rhetorical question, but it's probably quite valid. Miss Karen Brightman, would you like to come back on the points that have been raised so far?
Yes, please. The issue of sustainability and the core strategy policy, I just want to stress that we are in a situation where we don't have a 5-year land supply. Yes, if we had one, we will be looking purely at whether the proposal met with the development plan, and we probably would be refusing it because it doesn't meet with those policies, and there's no suggestion that it does. However, we have no choice but to follow the MPPF, which says that if you don't have a 5-year supply of housing land, then your policies for allocating housing land, so that's CS1 and all the other development plan policies that supply housing, are out of date. And I would just caution members, we really wouldn't want to be in a situation where we were at an appeal trying to defend a reason for refusal around policies where the framework or the MPPF is quite clear. We should be treating those policies as out of date. That's not to say that we don't consider the harm that there would be for having housing in a less than sustainable. It's not an isolated countryside location, but it's a slightly less sustainable village in our hierarchy. So we have to keep that harm in mind, but I think it would be very difficult to argue that that in itself would be enough to outweigh the benefits of providing housing at a time when across the borough we just don't have enough of it. So that would be my point on sustainability. It's not that we're not recognising, you know, or we're not mixing Burton on the Wolds up with Loughborough and thinking it's got fantastic local facilities. It nevertheless has some. It's not as if we're talking about Ulverscroft or someone with absolutely no local facilities at all. There is a village with schools, and there is public transport. So that all goes into that balance that you do. Likewise with the ridge and furrow, we're not suggesting that the loss of it is just acceptable and ignoring it. We're acknowledging that it would be lost, but if, as the report says, it's not an atypical feature in the area. It's not the last bit of ridge and furrow left in the wolds, and there are some mitigations, i.e. preserving it. They're not as good as keeping it there. Not trying to say that they are, but they reduce that harm. And as soon as you start reducing all the harm that there is, then it becomes very difficult to say that that harm outweighs the benefits of the scheme. A point was raised about a more suitable site, there being more suitable sites in the village, and also the site across the road that you know, we're aware the neighbourhood plan allocates, but it allocates that on the basis of something that meets future need. So it's to meet need when the new local plan comes in, if there is some. And it, you know, it is pertinent that that's not a site that's necessarily ready to develop. It's got an existing use on it, so it can't really be seen as something that's going to meet the challenges of the housing need that we have right now at this point in time. Then hopefully I've responded to all these questions, but there was just a point about the housing on Shields Close and the fact that was newer and older housing. So apologies if I referred to it as new housing. I am aware that it's a mixture. I think the reason I mentioned newer housing is because the housing at the end of the cul-de-sac that's closest to the development is slightly newer than the more established housing. But it does nevertheless, it's very difficult in terms of landscape harm when a site is surrounded pretty much by development as this one is. It only really has the boundary to the east and part of the northern boundary that are directly onto open land. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think Jackie Jackson would like to come in first, Jacqueline, and then I have Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a few points as well that came up there. There was a statement that was said that we're only approving this because it's providing 106, and that would set a precedent. Firstly, all applications are on their own merits and no precedent is being set. But more importantly, this application isn't being proposed to be accepted in principle just because there's a 106. As Karen has just been through very thoroughly, and the report points out, every one of the aspects and principal considerations have been carefully considered. The harms weighed up, and you know, that puts in the plan in balance. We've also considered the conflict with the development plan, including the conflict with the neighbourhood plan, and the harm of that conflict is within the report and put in the planning balance as well. But we cannot get away from the fact that the council doesn't have a 5-year supply of housing. So for members to go forward and propose that they would have refused this application, which is what you're doing, on other grounds, you would have to explain how you have weighed the harm of those other things so that you come to the conclusion that they are significantly and demonstrably outweighing the benefits, because that is the test that paragraph 11D requires you to carry out. So I have to stress that to all members, because whilst it's uncomfortable and we're all in this new, very new situation that we've not been in for quite a long while. It's been over 5 years since we've had to consider these issues at Plans Committee. Nevertheless, we are in that position right now, and we do have to consider future applications whilst we've got no 5-year supply on that basis.
Thank you. Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions I would like to be elaborated on. One, we are recommending that, the officers are recommending in our page 86 we would have refused it because of 106, which Ms Jackson has actually explained to us. But surely this application is outside the limits of development, and it's actually non-sustainable because of road access, because there's right what Councillor Shields and the Borough Council said, there is no actual access other than by vehicular out there. And there's no, and the fact is I know the service centres will be Barrow and Eastleigh, and there is no access how to get to Barrow or Eastleigh. Surely we could use that, and the officers will actually say to me how we could use non-sustainability. And also, Chair, the village local plan, surely that should be taken into consideration as well. But at this point, so that we can actually maybe have some sort of recognition of our local plans, to be honest with you. I know I can understand what Ms Jackson and Mrs Bingham have said with regarding the actual 5-year supply, but surely we should be always taken into consideration. I'm not happy with the actual outcome of this at all, and I know we haven't got a supply, but what I would like to say is, can we not use outside the limits of development and non-sustainability because of access through, well-being of the residents that would actually be maybe occupying that scenario? I'll leave it. That's all I would like to say at this moment.
Thank you. I'll pass back to the officers. I think the gist is what people are probably thinking is, we accept the fact that the recommendation is to refuse. We would have refused it on the grounds of the 106 because it's not in place. Can we not add other reasons as well as the S106, if you like, to sort of almost back it up? Some of the suggestions that have come forward for which would come out when we discuss the 106, if we do eventually, are impossible anyway. But I'll move back to the officers. Is it Jacqueline Jackson or Karen Brightman that would like to take it up?
I'd just like to reiterate again, I mean, limits to development were mentioned then, and it was suggested that if it was outside limits to development, we could refuse it, or members could have refused it. It's not that simple, because the limits to development are in themselves a housing land supply policy, and the NPPF is absolutely abundantly clear that those policies in the current situation where we don't have a 5-year supply of housing land are out of date. So if we were to make a decision where we give those weight and almost ignore the advice in the NPPF, we would be in a very, very difficult situation in terms of an appeal. We can't really defend, we can't introduce those policies that were listed on the slide. So those are CS1, ST2, CT1, and I think it's WV 11 or 12 of the neighbourhood plan. All of those are all about allocating housing, and that's fine while we've got enough of it. But when we don't have enough, which is the current situation, we've got no choice but to consider those policies out of date and to just revert to an assessment of the site in terms of its benefits and whether there are any significant, and they do need to be significant and demonstrable for them to count in an appeal situation. harms that outweigh that benefit. Now, my advice or our advice would be that the conflict with the neighbourhood plan and the development plan as a whole in itself isn't enough to do that in this case, because the harms that are produced are all relatively small ones, and it would be very difficult to say that they were significant and demonstrable.
Right, Jacqueline Jackson, you wanted to come back, and then I have Councillor Tillotson.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, to just come in. Karen's covered most of what I was going to say. Really, it's a word of caution to members. You know, when you talk about bolstering the reason for refusal or adding it, you have to make sure that each one of the reasons for refusal that you put forward are defendable and are defendable at the public inquiry. You know, we know that we're heading into this public inquiry in April, and we have to be absolutely sure that our position is something that is reasonable and in line with the guidance of the NPPF. So, you know, I'm just drawing members' minds back to those requirements.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you. Given what we've heard from officers, I don't believe we've got any reason to do anything other than go with officer recommendation. I think anything else would be a mistake and would not go down well when it comes to the appeal. So I believe we should be refusing, but only on the ground of a not agreed 106 agreement.
Yeah, or you need to.
Right. We have on the table a proposal that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse on the grounds we would have refused this application on the grounds of a lack of a 106 agreement. I have two other speakers. Do I have anybody that would support or second Councillor Tillotson before I move on to Councillor Charles and Councillor Ward? Not at this time. Right, Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question really for the officers. Obviously, we have no 5-year land supply currently. I understand that the local plan is going out for consultation in the not too distant future. Will that not count in some way as an emerging plan and carry any weight to planning? Because if I'm understanding what the officers are saying now, really we have no way of refusing any subsequent planning application as long as it ticks a few boxes, which is a concern, I think. And I'm just wondering when the 5-year plan, when the 5-year supply is likely to be in place. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, if it's okay, I'll pick that up. Chair, is that okay if I pick it up? You're on mute.
Richard Bennett had his hand up.
Oh, okay.
But did you want to come in before Richard, or did you want to speak? Right, Mr. Bennett, Richard Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to squabble for stage time with my colleague, Mrs. Jackson, but I'm sure she was just about to say that the weight that can be given to an emerging local plan is actually very limited. It does gain more weight once it's been submitted for an examination to the Secretary of State, but it's still very limited weight until it's actually got right towards the end of its process. And the reason for that is that through the examination process, modifications can be made to the policies by the inspector. They're subject to consultation in their own right, and so there's not really any certainty until you get beyond that stage. And given that the plan's not due to be considered by council until July 2022, there is quite a way to go yet until we can provide you that degree of weight in the new plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair.
I just wanted to ask out of interest why we find ourselves in this position and why the application wasn't determined within the allotted timescale.
Who wants, Karen Brightman, you want to come back on
I
that?
can come back on that. The application has taken quite a while to reach the stage it's at now because there have been some issues around technical matters. So there were some problems around drainage that the LLFA wanted more information on. It's not unusual in those situations, and also there were studies that needed to be commissioned on odour and noise to find out whether there was an issue in terms of the poultry farm at the corner of the site. So those are all matters that have delayed the application, which is why it hasn't been determined in terms of in the time frame that the applicant was expecting. I just wanted to, there was one other point that I wanted to come back on, and that was the point that if we allow it, or if members were to suggest they were allowing this application, does that mean that all greenfield sites are suddenly open for the same treatment? And I just wanted to point out, no, it doesn't set a precedent, because in every single case there is always a balance such as this to be made. So members will always have to decide whether there are significant and demonstrable harms that outweigh the benefits specific to any other site in the borough. So I just wanted to allay those fears, really, and make it clear that it's only the site specifics in this case, i.e. that some of the harms here that aren't outweighing the benefits in this particular case.
Thank you. Thank you. I have Councillor Camsell and Councillor Tassell. Councillor Camsell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the officer tells us that there's an housing shortage, but my residents tell me we need more council housing. Will there be any council houses among these 70 houses built, please?
I'll ask the officers, but I'm not sure. It's not known as council houses now. I think it's more to be affordable houses, but I'll ask the officers, but I don't think that's what we're discussing tonight anyway.
Well, no,
this is
Chair,
an outline permission for 70 houses that we've been asked to, we would have refused because it's, as the officers have gone through quite a bit, but we're not here discussing the makeup of the houses as far as I'm aware. So I don't know whether one of the officers wants to come back on that. Karen Brightman, and then I'll move to Councillor Tass.
Yeah, just very briefly, the applicant does propose 40% affordable housing. So those would be typically low cost homes that are managed to allow people to afford those. And there is always, with any affordable housing, if there isn't a registered provider found, there is sometimes the option that, or there would be the option written into a typical 106 that those units could be transferred to the council in the event of there being an unsuitable landlord for them.
Councillor Tassell.
Thank you. I just want to add a query really on what good is the neighbourhood plan going to be, which has cost the residents and the councils an awful lot of money, if they're not now going to have any say in where the development is going to be. Also, before the government actually squashed the new planning laws, they were pushing for towns and villages to get the neighbourhood plan so that they could be told where they were going to have the houses built. I'm very surprised to hear now that, or have I got it wrong, that the neighbourhood plan is not effective.
I think the officers have tried to explain that, Councillor Tassell, and it's all to do with our 5-year supply, but if you want it explained again, I'm sure they will. But what we're actually discussing is whether we would have refused and to move forward. But if you want, I've got Jacqueline Jackson is willing to come back to you, but I think we've discussed.
I don't want to waste the time, Councillor Fryer.
No.
I
think
think
it's
we are
important.
considering doing at Shepshed a neighbourhood plan, but we're now I'm listening to this. I know we haven't got the 5-year housing supply, and I know that we're down for over 2,000 houses, where there's still 800 houses from the last 2,000 still to be built. But we've got no say. We haven't going to have no say in it, are we?
May I come back, Chair? So the neighbourhood, specifically the neighbourhood plan, when we talk about Para 11 and development plan policies being out of date, that refers to policies that restrict the supply of housing. And that's all development plan policies. So it does include neighbourhood plans, but only for those that restrict the supply of housing. So all the other policies, providing they're in line with the NPPF and they meet the other criteria, which, you know, neighbourhood plans do, they would be still granted full weight. Paragraph 14 of the NPPF also relates to how you should consider neighbourhood plans in the situation where paragraph 11D is engaged, which is what we're talking about when we've not got a 5-year supply. Now, we've spent a lot of time considering those elements, and that's all set out in the report, and the harm that that there is for the conflict with the neighbourhood plan policies relating to housing in this particular case have been, we believe, ascribed the right amount of weight in regards to the harm in the planning balance. But, you know, these are policies that relate to the supply of housing rather than, you know, other policies that still could benefit from full weight. This is only an outline, so really we're only dealing with principle here, not other matters that might be, you know, related to the other policies in the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all appreciate it's a very, very complicated subject at the moment. Councillor Forrest, you wanted to come forward?
Thank you, Chair. In the hope that we can move forward, I will reluctantly second Councillor Tillotson's proposal that we accept officer's recommendation. However, I do want to say, I think this planning committee tonight has been placed in an impossible situation, and I very much feel great sympathy for Burton on the Wolds Parish Council for the situation in which they find themselves. And I do hope this kind of thing, we are facing a difficult couple of years, clearly, but I do hope that this kind of thing isn't going to become a regular feature of Charnwood Borough Council Planning Committee's life. So, as I say, I am seconding Councillor Tillotson's proposal.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Forrest, and I think you've probably reiterated what a lot of people on this committee feel. I think this has been one of our more challenging meetings, certainly since we've had to do it over Zoom, which always makes it much harder than when we're all together in a meeting room. Now, did any of the officers want to come back? We do have it proposed by Councillor Tillotson and seconded by Councillor Forrest that on this occasion we accept, we endorse the officer's recommendation. And if that's okay. I'd see no officers indicating they want to come back. Right, so I shall now do the roll call. And as you know, it's 4 against and abstain. So Councillor Bentley.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Council.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Capleton.
For the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Charles.
Reluctantly for, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
With the previous speaker, I am reluctantly for.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Again, reluctantly for.
Councillor Mark Lowe. I didn't hear you, Councillor Lowe. You're muted.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Ranson.
Reluctantly, Chair, for. And let's hope we get a good 106 money or get some good out of this.
Councillor Savage.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Tassell.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, like the others, reluctantly for.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Abstain, Chair.
And I will join now for. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I would like that confirmed, please, by the legal officer. I make that 8 for, 4 against, and 1 abstain.
And I agree with you, Chair. That's 8 for, 4 against, and 1 abstain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's been very difficult for us all, but maybe we can have a say at the appeal. Right. We now move on to our final item, which is the list of item 6, the list of applications determined under delegated powers. Now, I don't obviously, as always, propose to go through all this. Could you, if you have any questions regarding any of the delegated powers decisions, if you could raise your hand. Councillor Tassell.
It's just a very quick. In the past, these have all been in alphabetical order for the towns or villages. They're now all over the place. Can I ask why?
I think it's in date order. I might be wrong, but I think it's done by date.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, it's this list is always done in the order of the decisions. The one that's done in the parish is the weekly list, which is the one that's released every week of the new applications.
Thank you very much. But that one, the parish list, doesn't give us the results, which is what our
no, but those
want to see.
I think the ones for the parish, aren't they, the new ones?
Yes, they are. And these are the decisions, and this is what the residents wanted to see. So when we put it out, we've now got to go through and put them in, whereas we were able to photocopy the old sheets. That's all.
Okay. Right. Any other questions? No. Well, I'd like to, again, thank you all very much indeed for quite a difficult meeting and for the attention and diligence you've shown on it. I've now lost my sheet, which tells me when the next meeting is. I think, oh yes, I found it. Thursday, the 25th of February. So take care, stay safe, and see you then. And thank you all, and particularly the officers, for guiding us through this meeting as well. Sorry, did someone want to speak? No.